Hi, everybody. I'm Sue Hillyard, and I'm here with Rav Chahal for our Astro Coffee, um, up close and personal interviews with your favorite astrologers. And today we have one of my favorite astrologers, Gray Crawford. Welcome, Gray.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. It's really nice to be here with both of you.
Yes, yes. Okay, so I'll start off with a little bit of astrology about Gray. Um, his Sun and Jupiter are conjunct my North Node, so I tend to learn so much from him, and I always appreciate his writing and everything that that he has to say. So, shall we start off, Gray, by let's see, we'll show your chart. And do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to astrology, and how it kind of shows in your chart?
Sure. I think one thing you can see from my chart is that have a very strong amount of Pisces. I do work with Jupiter, being the Lord of Pisces, Pisces being the home of Jupiter. Which I know some people watching us might do Neptune a little bit more. But I'm Gemini rising, so my Mercury is exactly on my midheaven in Pisces, plus my sun is Pisces, plus my sun is with Jupiter in Pisces. So it's a lot of Pisces. And so although I wouldn't always agree with like every single thing I'd see about Pisces, a lot of the descriptions about Pisces that I would come across would definitely resonate with me. And so I'm one of those people where some of that sun sign astrology, just kind of general characteristics of signs, when I heard it, there was definitely things about Pisces that made sense to me and, got me a little bit more um, interested in astrology in that way. Then I would just say, as I read more and more about it, I've just really appreciated how it started to first help me understand myself just from that Pisces perspective, but much more so once I realized there was a whole chart and all these other sides of myself that I could see how, learning about astrology and all the different parts of ourselves and the whole complexity of the chart and everything else just really deepened my understanding of myself. And that was really the starting point for me. But I would also say at the very outset, one of my girlfriends at the time, we got into reading about each other. So there was also, I would have to say, too, a thing about learning about other people that are, important in your life through astrology, and then helping that, shed light on your relationship with one another. And then, of course, as I kept going, I realized, how this is also revealing things about the world and, what's going on in the world, as well as like great cycles of history. There's just so much there. So, yeah, it just kind of unfolded from there. The more and more I kept getting into it.
And was there a specific point in your astrology, the astrology of your life that this occurred, or that was notable, or was it just kind
Oh,
of?
when I got into it more,
Mm.
yeah, probably I got into it more probably around my first nodal return, because although I was aware of astrology previously, it was definitely in my university years of like, 18, 19, 20, um when I started getting into it more. And then also, it was very roughly around the time of my second Jupiter return that I found out more about that actually, like, I met somebody that actually knew something about astrology, so they could actually be like, what's your rising sign and moon? And no one had ever brought that to my attention before. I never met anyone that knew anything about it. And so I would say probably it's very roughly that second Jupiter return time period is when I realized, oh, there's a whole chart and a whole system of astrology to actually learn. And that's when I really got um invested in really wanting to learn as much as possible. And it, never let up after that point.
Wow.
Wow. But interesting that you said about Pisces being so strong in your chart even before you probably knew astrology. With the South
Yeah.
Node in the 12th house and your moon in the 12th house, there's your more emphasis of Piscean energies coming through into your life, So it's interesting how you've already felt it, and through the astrology, it's kind of a validation to what you were feeling, I guess.
Yeah, and one of the things too, I was very shy, and with a lot of people, I wouldn't talk much. But then certain people I'd be comfortable around, I would note how much I would talk at times, and just like almost giving too much information at times. Just if I was excited to talk to somebody, and before I knew about there being other sides of the chart, I wasn't seeing that as much in the Pisces description. So I remember one of the first things I kind of realized was like, okay, the Gemini, that makes sense that
Mm.
I actually have that really strong in my chart. Yeah, and I'd say as far as the 12th house moon and being with the South Node and the Gemini, I mean, in my undergraduate university years, I did focus on psychology, but I was also always really interested in history. And I think there's something I always found reading biographies of people really interesting, even when I was really young, and learning about people's lives and just our whole psychology and how they played into like the context of like larger historical patterns was always just something that was interesting to me. And I feel like that is just a very natural fit with astrology if you're interested in those things. And I think that definitely goes with my Gemini side. Astrology just enables you to explore all of that at much greater depth.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree because I have something very similar in terms of interest.
Yeah,
Finding out people's lives, why they had these experiences and what led them to
right,
those experiences.
right.
I agree. In the psychology side, yeah, I resonate with that. So I can see that with the Gem 9 as well. Um,
Yeah,
you
and
know,
there's also just a very natural, like, I mean, storyteller. I mean, we like to tell stories with astrology, and that's clearly there. You can see that in my chart if you just look at the Pisces and Gemini alone. And part of that in that same time period that I was referring to, I was majoring in psychology, but during that same time period, I also got much more into like mythology, and that became a big focus of mine then like through the rest of my 20s and beyond, which I think comes in with my chart also. And then there's ways you can explore mythology with astrology as well. So all of that's always been very interesting to me.
Well, and you use it a lot in your
Mhm.
Patreon group. I mean,
Mhm.
we talk a lot about, yeah, I mean, you're always talking about the mythology, and you've uh, you know, done some deep dives into mythology, right?
Yeah, and yeah, in the Patreon on one of the levels, if you look at my Patreon, it's like the oak branch or tier. Yeah, each month we've been going over like a different star. So for example, we just did Regulus, and we'll look at the meaning of the star in mundane astrology and natal astrology and magic. But also there always will be a lot of mythology brought in with that. So and I also tend to bring it in with my writing, and if I'm ever doing talks on astrology, I usually will find out some different ways to bring in mythology and different concepts into whatever it is I'm talking about. Yeah.
Well, yes, and for anybody that hasn't seen Gray's writing, it's fantastic. I mean, the between the Mercury and Pisces, and just your ability to tell a story and to connect the all of the influences that are going on is incredible. I
Oh,
enjoy
thank
it.
you. Yeah, thank you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Mercury in the ninth house, ninth house being, beliefs and, stories and, linking to the right side of the brain, when it's like Jupiter related. So I feel you're channeling some information from previous lifetimes that you've experienced, as much as what you've learned in this incarnation. I feel you've been a messenger in the past and
Mm.
you're continuing that journey in this lifetime.
Yeah, that all of that does make sense. I've definitely heard people say that before
Yeah, and
about my chart.
being the ruler of your south node
Mm-hmm.
and square the
Certainly, yeah.
nodes.
And
Yeah.
square the nodes, yep. And by secondary progressions, my Mercury is now actually all the way over in Gemini, going across my south node. So
How convenient.
that's been another, yeah. That's all definitely gotten more activated through looking at secondary progressions.
Yeah, and secondary progressions is something that you've focused on too. That was
Mm-hmm.
one of the first things that I learned about from you. Well, actually, the first thing was about secondary progressions, but as the progressed moon phases, you did an
Oh,
EA
right.
Zoom. You did an EA Zoom meeting that I had
Yeah.
forgotten about, and
Yeah, that's right.
about the moon phases, and I actually ended up being your example chart for the balsamic phase of progressed moon sun.
Right, that's amazing. Yeah, I need to go. Well, I don't know if I do want to go back and watch that just because of
I
seeing the
have, and
stuff then, but
it's I enjoyed it.
yeah. Was that in 2014 maybe, or
Probably
20
2016.
2016? Okay.
Yeah, well, we started in 2016.
Okay, it must have been 2016
So
then.
yeah, so 2016 or
Okay.
yeah, we
I thought it
started
was
in the
even
summer.
before that for some reason.
Yeah.
I know that was the first time I had ever done any kind of webinar of speaking online. So
Oh wow,
very interesting that was
that was how we
yeah,
met.
that you ended up being part of that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Basically
yeah,
we went through like each, I think, procrastination phase. Yeah, that was back when Linda was organizing it, and she was always
exactly.
trying to get me to come on and do them, and I'd always be like, I don't know. And finally did that one, which was good. That was a great opportunity to be able to present information through the EA Zoom community.
Yes, and Rob and I have shown the EA Zoom chart, and it is full of Virgo and Pisces.
Okay,
It was when let me think what it was.
that makes sense.
Neptune was conjunct the South Node in Pisces, and
Oh,
Mercury was
interesting.
conjunct the North Node in Virgo. Was the birth chart, and the Sun. The sun was at I believe it was 10 or 11 degrees Virgo, and Mercury was conjunct the North Node. So EA Zoom meetings was born of Virgo Pisces energy. And
That's awesome.
she used to say that we'd all been together before, and that we were, now we're back and talking about it.
Well, that certainly makes sense. I've certainly got Neptune and Mercury involved in my EA nodal story there. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
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 As do I. As do I in my own chart. I have Neptune squaring the nodes in the third house, which is Neptune and Gemini kind of related
Yeah.
as well. Yeah. Must be a very strong theme going on with the astrologers on EA Zoom.
Well, let's see. Where shall we go from here? We've got questions that we kind of ask everybody. Well, that we
Mhm.
potentially could ask everybody.
Yeah.
Let's see. We've never
I
asked.
actually just want. Oh, I
Go
just
ahead.
wanted just to about us being drawn into astrology. I just wanted to know how it's helped you in your own life. If you could share with the audience in terms of, I know being an astrologer helps, but how has coming to astrology helped you navigate this journey of life?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine navigating through life without it. Like I
Mm.
mentioned, just really understanding myself. There's definitely, when I think about it, there's sort of almost two different ways which seem, I guess, oppositional, but I think they're really part of the same thing, which is on one hand, I feel like it can help in terms of can be a sense of coherence and clarification of things that you can gain, but there's also very much like a loosening and being aware of more of this like multiplicity of different sides of yourself, you know, where certain parts of yourself might be being kind of dominant, and then there's other sides of yourself that maybe aren't quite as dominant and running the show, so to speak, that you then become aware of through astrology. Um, as well as, yeah, just helping me with, like I mentioned before, with relationships and understanding more what was going on. Once I learned, and so there was so much, I think, just even learning about just the natal chart. And then once I learned about transits, that was obviously another layer, that you're kind of experiencing these temporary time periods of certain, you know, planetary movements impacting the natal chart in certain way. And then there's a whole variety of timing techniques, secondary progressions, we already mentioned, being one of many. That's just a whole nother layer of things about your chart and who you are, just kind of unfolding over time. So, and, you know, especially certain, you know, darker, more difficult periods of my life, I feel like astrology was something I really turned to in those time periods. And it was really more about that kind of self-understanding and self-realization. And then at a certain point, realizing that I knew enough that I could be helping other people. And so that's another meaningful side of things, is, you know, just working on consultations with people to help them that way. And then also, you know, often teaching now too, and being a teacher of astrology.
Well, and you have a varied background. You also bring in some Hellenistic
Mm-hmm.
techniques. You want to talk a little bit about that and how that?
Yeah, well, I did go through a period. I mean, it was a long time ago at this point. Oh, 14, over 14 years ago, I guess. And even more, even a little bit earlier than that, when I was learning evolutionary astrology. And I don't know, have you all interviewed Bradley Naragon on
He's
this yet?
he's
Or
he's almost
Coming.
next.
he's almost next. Okay, cool.
Yeah, he's yeah, very soon.
Yeah, well, Bradley is someone I've been friends with. I want to say I met Bradley to get to know him more in was it 2000, maybe 2006, 2007 for sure, I feel like. And anyway, and it was soon after. He was actually, I had knew one other astrologer prior to Bradley. He was a woman here named Rosie Finn. He like actually got a reading from, and she became my first astrology teacher. And then Bradley, I'd say, is the first person like my age who was actually like an astrologer, and the first other person I ever had met that was like you know, someone that actually was an astrologer, which is pretty wild, because at that point, you know, I was you know, already basically through my Saturn return. It took me really that long. I think around my Saturn returns when I finally met an astrologer. I had a very different experience than other people that, you know, come across astrologers at a much younger age. And Bradley then was very into evolutionary astrology, and increasingly so. Um, and to the point that every conversation with him was just always turning into him talking to me about evolutionary astrology and Jeff Green. And I had looked at Jeff Green's book before, but you know, he's really the person, through his passion for it, which, you know, he's still doing to this day, um, got me much more curious about learning it. And then I spent time on the message board and went to some conferences and for the evolutionary astrology. But yeah, interestingly, when I finally went to an evolutionary astrology conference, which was really exciting, because there's people like when I was learning, Jason Holley was learning on that message board at the same time as me, and we become friends. So I got to meet him in person, and there were other people there that I was getting to meet in person that I just knew from that evolutionary astrology message board. And though the person that I was most excited about, though, honestly, was not somebody that did evolutionary astrology, and that's Demetra George. who was also at that conference, and gave an amazing talk on Demeter and Persephone. She had in fact just been on a sacred tour of Greek sites. In fact, Jason Holley had been with her on that tour, and he was talking to me about that. And Demetra had been such a huge influence on me with the Asteroid Goddess book that even though I was interested in evolutionary astrology, I would say she was kind of a bigger figure to me than like people really put like Jeff Green up on a pedestal. I was really like that with Demetra. So I was like I was just so excited that she was there, and I got a reading with her at that conference, and she was doing whole sign, and I had already been aware that she had shifted into Hellenistic astrology, but that kind of piqued my interest. And then in those years following that, I just got more and more interested in learning Hellenistic astrology. And yeah, I mean, I a lot of the techniques I use definitely come from Hellenistic astrology at this point, and I've gone through different certifications with Demetra even, and so that's become a really major part of my practice at this point.
That's awesome. And I love that. I love the story about, meeting astrologers and going, oh wow, that I get to hang out with them at a
Yeah.
conference. That's so cool. Do you remember what year that was?
That was 2011.
2011. Okay.
Yeah, there was a conference in 2011, and then I think 2012, like back-to-back years.
Yes.
And I feel like there wasn't one again.
Yes, and I think
Probably until the online ones that's happened
I
recently.
think you're right. And
Yeah.
2012 was the first conference that I ever went to.
Mm.
And I was similarly in awe of, all of the presenting astrologers, including Jason and Demetra. They were both,
Yeah.
and Bradley and
Yeah, Jason and Bradley both spoke at that one.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually the first time I'd ever seen Jason speak, and yeah, see his presentation style and everything, which is very inspirational and exciting and stuff. That side of his personality.
Yes. And so something I know about you is that you're about to go on a trip with Jason. You guys are taking a tour to Greece.
Yeah, that's really the most exciting thing for me, really about this whole year, but certainly about this next month. I always had wanted to go on the different sacred tours of Greek sites that Demetra would be running, and just was never in a good financial position to do that. But actually, interestingly, when I was working on certification with her, based on a paper, because she would have us write research papers about sort of Hellenistic era, and I was writing something on Hellenical rising planets and stars, and writing about this temple in Sparta related to Artemis or Thea, and that the temple altar was oriented to the Hellenical rising of the Pleiades, and giving me feedback on that. She just sort of had this vision about me that I was going to be leading tours to Greece, and she was like, I'll put you in touch with my tour guide. And I was not at that point in my life really in a place where I felt like I could really pull that all together. But I was like, wow, that's amazing. You see that about me. But what's really even more remarkable about her saying that to me was how it didn't really honestly take, in the bigger picture of things, too long before then. Jason he'd been going to Greece, and he'd been thinking about doing this, and then yeah, he offered me to basically assist him as like a co-facilitator of leading one of these tours to Greece. So yeah, we're going to be doing that. Me and my partner Jeannie will be going there during this month of August coming up, but the actual tour that we're on won't start until September.
Rob's and my birthday.
Yeah, actually, it's pretty much right on your birthday. Yeah, that we are starting it.
I so wanted to
yeah,
go, but I
yeah,
hear you about not being in a position to.
yeah.
right
Yeah,
now.
it's really exciting, and we'll be on this one. We're going to all of the kind of real major sites that you would, you know, people's first experience of Greece would think about in terms of, you know, like around Athens and like the Temple of Poseidon and the Artemis in Braron and like Eleusis and
Oh,
Epidaurus and the Oracle of Delphi and you know, Olympia and lots of places. And so that's really exciting, and I've already it's just starting to get into more research around that, and looking at the relationship of the land and like local conceptions of the different deities and actually being there with the land. Yeah, it's a real exciting kind of threshold, I guess, for me, where I don't really know where all that's going to end up leading with the work I do with astrology. But yeah,
well, I
it'll.
hope it leads to more and that I get to be part of one of them at least
Oh
in
yeah, more
the
more
future.
Taurus. Yeah.
So we will have to
Mm.
go. I've been saying to Sue, I need to get her to this part of the world. You know,
Mm.
if I'd known about this, I might have also have joined during that week. And I've been to Greece twice.
Oh
And
wow.
incidentally, the first time I'd gone up was around about 18. And then I
Wow.
went back just before my 40th, second time. And I've always felt something powerful with Greece, the history, mythology, and I've studied it back at in high school. And you talk about the temple of sorry, the Oracle at Delphi.
Oh,
I
Delphi.
actually
Yeah.
have a picture of sitting sitting
Wow.
on and sitting there and thinking, this they thought this is the center of the universe. This is where they thought, you know, it all begins. But I was
Right.
18 back then, but now different lens, different perspective, different knowledge. And it's nice that you're going back with the lens of the sacredness to the land and the
Yeah.
history it's had. So that'll be a whole different experience. So yeah, maybe next time you guys plan a trip that way, I might be joining you.
Mm.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
and in the meantime, we'll live vicariously through through your trip.
Right. Well,
Uh,
I'll definitely end up being. I'll be talking about it for sure with whatever I do afterwards. So yeah.
Awesome. Yes. So let's see, shifting gears. Okay, I have one question. What advice would you give to anybody who's wishing to become a professional astrologer about, how to proceed?
Yeah. I mean, so I guess are you saying especially people that are already interested in learning
Mhm.
and then want to become more professional?
Yeah, yeah. Anybody that thinks that they want to do it as a career.
Yeah. Well, I guess at that point, I mean, I'd say for one thing, for sure, just in terms of learning, just to be open to different perspectives, and because there's it's such a huge field of astrology. But then if you can find someone to really learn from, um, I think that's really helpful as far as learning from specific teachers. And then I guess even getting to that next stage, there's certainly lots of people out there that offer mentoring that you can meet with, and that can always be a really helpful way to learn. I've had people do that with me, in fact, as far as just having some sessions with me and looking at charts or you know, getting help with that. And that's I've noticed that seems to help people a little bit who are on the cusp of like wanting just to make sure they feel really confident as far as doing consultations with people. Um, Definitely think going actually investing in going to some astrology conferences that are happening in real life is a really helpful thing too, that it really is worth it. I know there's just so many online things that are available right now, but and even though it can be a struggle socially, especially if you have some social anxiety or insecurities to work through to actually go to a conference and push yourself to do that, but it really is worth it because just having that experience of being around other astrologers, there's a good chance you can even meet people that end up becoming really important. to your work, or whether that's people you're learning from or people you're collaborating with or just friends. And I mean, otherwise, you know, one thing people need to figure out too is, I guess, as far as, you know, if you are somebody that already has maybe like a local practice of people where you live, and you happen to have an opportunity to either give consultations at a certain space, let's say it's like a bookstore, or you know, some place where you can give consults, or you just start being able to give some to people where you are. Sometimes, you know, just word of mouth alone can be enough to start generating a lot of interest in people working with you. Otherwise, you really need to have something that you figure out, I guess, as a way to put yourself out there so people getting to know you. For me, that was definitely just starting a blog and writing. And by me just writing about astrology, it started, you know, getting people interested in working with me. But there's so many things that you can do now, whether that's making YouTube videos or whatever else it is. But having some kind of way to put yourself out there so people just start getting to know you is also really helpful. And with that, I would just suggest experimenting with lots of different things until you kind of figure out, you know, what's going to end up being something that kind of takes hold as something you can keep doing, you know. I mean, and also since y'all do the EA Zooms, I mean, anybody that's watching this that's interested in speaking or teaching about astrology, I would definitely recommend giving webinars through the EA Zoom community, because like I mentioned, that's the first thing I ever did online. It's a very safe place to start doing that. You know, it's all set up, and you already have people that watch them, so you kind of automatically get exposed to people that might be interested in working with you or knowing more about you.
Yeah, we have an audience of, I think, like 13,000 subscribers. So yes, it is. Thank you for mentioning that, because we're always looking for up and coming. That was Linda's thing, is that she wanted to give you know, voice, a platform for up and coming astrologers to, you know, become visible. So yeah, we're always looking for speakers. And we're also, Rob and I are all looking for astrologers to interview too in this series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's important, as Gray just mentioned, because I'm pretty much a shy individual myself. And to put myself on here, I know Sue's asked over the last couple of years, you know, when you're ready, please come forward. But the Virgo side of me was like, oh, I'll make this better. I'll make this better. You know, just that it can get better. It can get better. And then it just got to a point, I was like, if I don't dive in now, I'm never going to do it. And it's like you said, just that one video and something you're passionate about. Because I've realized for me, I thought I wouldn't be able to, you know, be in front of a camera and an audience and put myself on YouTube. But I've realized what my biggest strength I feel is that I am passionate about what I do. I'm passionate about helping people and sharing this knowledge. And I think that's the first hurdle done. And then it's right now, it's just chatting to, you know, colleagues, friends, like-minded individuals, and having a conversation. And even the subject that you speak about, it will naturally come. But the passion for astrology, I think, is very key. And like you mentioned, whatever you're drawn to is right for you. And the platform here is to help people grow, to help this community grow, to know what, you know, you're not alone. I'm in London, and yes, there's a lot of astrologers here, but do I know any astrologers in London? No, I really don't. For me, it's everybody in America right now, in Canada, etc. But it's nice to know there's a community that I can turn to, people that, you know, if I have any issues to do with any work that I'm doing, questions, I know there's people I can reach out to, and it's been nice, and it's been through this EA platform when I was first asked to come on, and it's built through that. So I think this is a great platform, and I'm sure Linda is looking down and is very proud of what we're doing and what we've done and what's to come.
Amen, sister. I totally agree.
Yeah.
So Rob, do you have a
I do.
question?
I do. I'm intrigued about a transit that's happening right now Gray, in your life.
Okay.
It's the Neptune transit.
All right.
We're
Yeah.
going to link to Pisces here. It's me and Sue were just mentioning it before we started recording. It's going right. It's been over your sun
Yep.
and it's building to your Jupiter. I'm just intrigued about the experiences you're having and what's coming up for
Yeah,
you in
it's been
terms of
very
that transit.
big. Yeah, it's been a big transit for me. I mean, one thing when we were talking about the going to Greece
Mm.
this next month, it's definitely gone with that. If I'm remembering right when it was coming up to my son, I mean, obviously there was a buildup over a number of years as it was getting closer and closer to my son. But in terms of it actually crossing over the degree and minute of my son, it was very close. It happened not long after there's a the Nor so when mentioning astrology conference is a really great one to go to is the NORWAC astrology conference, the Northwest Astrology Conference that's run by Laura Nalbandian, daughter of Maggie Nalbandian, who was the originator of that. Just because we're doing EA here, right? That's her bookstore is where Jeff Green actually practiced, and so the evolutionary astrology entire system of Jeff Green's work is actually very connected to that particular conference. Anyway, I spoke at that conference, well, this past year, but also the year before in 2023. And that was when Neptune was coming to my degree in minute almost exactly. I think it was maybe like the week or two after NORWAC that year that I had the exact conjunction for the first time. And it was actually at that conference. It was funny actually, before I had seen Jason Holley, I ran across Demetra and she was like, "Oh, Jason tells me you're going to be going on a trip to Greece with him." And I was like, "Oh, really?" Because didn't know that. And I guess he had seen her and told her that, and then yeah, then I saw him soon after that at the conference, and was he had talked to me about it before, I guess, but actually being like, no, I want to seriously plan this and do this, and so I would definitely say it goes with that because even then I remember when it retrograded back across my sun for the second time, I think we had a conversation on the phone or something where we were pl- further planning it and getting more specific about it happening like now and then it coming back across again, was still obviously happening. So among other things, that's definitely one thing that I have tracked showing up exactly with it. And now it's been interesting because I think I have two more on my sun still to happen. But very recently, it's been more like Neptune getting really close to my Jupiter. So one thing has also
Very
gone,
close.
yeah, and this is all in my 10th house. And during this time period, I have moved from doing astrology in my spare time um, while working another full-time job into now I am actually doing astrology full-time as like my full-time career. So that has actually been part of it. And what's interesting about that is when Neptune previously was in Pisces um, and crossed over my Mercury in my midheaven, that was generally the time period when I started my website and was putting my work out there a lot more with my writing and doing more talks and stuff, as it moved, like that EA Zoom with you, Sue, has been kind of earlier in the Neptune. So the Neptune going across Pisces is completely gone with me going out there much more professionally as an astrologer to the point that yeah, by the end, as it gets to that Jupiter at the very end of Pisces that I have, I'm doing it full time. And then I would say what I talked about with, this whole another dimension of things that will open up with actually going to Greece and going to these ancient mystery sites and all these temples and these different local areas of land and how that connects in with everything is part of that
Yeah.
story, whatever ends up happening. Yeah. I
Well,
haven't
Pluto.
really had like, it hasn't been a negative. I know some people really talk about it being like delusional and addiction and escape, but that hasn't been part of it for me. So it's been overall, I'd say a pretty positive transit for me for the most part. You know, not everything's perfect, but I haven't had some of those really negative Neptune interpretations you hear people talk about. Hasn't been my experience of it.
Well,
Well, could you?
Neptune
Sorry,
is
sir.
so different from, say, Saturn in the way it brings things about. The way you described your the trip coming about with Jason is like, oh, Demetra tells you that you're he mentions that she heard that you're going to do it, and then then you kind of have a conversation with Jason about about doing it, and I love it. It is so Neptune how it just everything is right, and there are other forces that are unseen that are in the ethers that are
Yeah.
bringing it about.
Yeah, but I was just going to mention as well that Pluto's been transiting through your 8th house. I feel once it moves into your 9th house, you'll be planning more trips in future. So if you ever end up going to Egypt, which I think you will, I want to go with you. I want to be there.
Yeah. That would definitely be, that's on the list for sure, is to end up going to Egypt. Yeah. No, the Pluto moving to my 9th house is definitely exciting, and I agree that it'll be notable once it hits that 9th house cusp in the quadrant system. I have already noticed, even when you look at things from a whole sign perspective, just the Pluto going into my 9th, that has actually coincided with this first one. In terms of going, but actually what's interesting is, as right when we're going to be in Greece, well, when I go there, Pluto will still be in Aquarius, but while I'm there, Pluto will go back into Capricorn. Yeah, but yes, I do think Pluto going across my 9th house quadrant cusps, whether you use this is Placidus here, but forget what it is in Porphyry, but that'll certainly be significant for me once Pluto crosses that cusp. Yeah.
We can look, because I have a different chart in Porphyry with all of the planetary.
Okay, yeah, it's a little bit
in
more
it.
850. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's very, very close.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very, very similar. So at that point, have you looked where will Uranus be? I know it'll be in Gemini, but
I
it'll
don't
have gone
remember, to
over
be
your
honest.
yeah. I'm sure it will have already gone over your south node.
Oh yeah, that'll all happen. Yeah, that's certainly another big thing going on for me, is that next year when Uranus goes into Gemini, that will be really big for me, because the early Uranus and Gemini period will be right on my moon.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exciting times.
So that's exciting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
It really is.
It is really exciting. And the one thing that I would like to point out about your chart that I just love, you being a Pisces, is that your Mars in Aquarius is exactly, well, very close to the south node of Neptune, which
Yeah.
do you want to talk a little bit about that before we?
Sure. I mean, it's a really big thing in my chart. I agree. And what's also interesting to me about that is, you might notice I have like, well, it depends how you want to define a yod with the slower moving, faster moving planets, but I consider it to be a yod with my Saturn, Neptune, Mars that are all at 11 degrees. Mars and Neptune are sextiling, and they're both in quincunxing Saturn. But what's interesting is that the week before I was born, Saturn stationed direct at 11, 12 Cancer, and Neptune stationed retrograde at 11, 47 Sag. I forget the exact minute, but Saturn had just stationed direct, Neptune had just stationed retrograde, so they're both essentially stationing and really important for me in those ways in my chart. And then Mars just like moved right in to the other 11-degree place, you know, right when I was born, which I just have always thought is really interesting about, you know, the timing of my birth. And then that there's this Mars, Neptune, Saturn configuration like that. But then Mars is additionally at the south node of Neptune. And yeah, I think if nothing else, it certainly goes with my interest in astrology and all of this. And then certainly like mentioning, you know, going to Greece and going to all these sites and, you know, all of that is very interesting to me. So that I think that's all that kind of stuff could speak to the south node of Neptune. There's also I've seen this with some other astrologers that I know that are teachers. Um, but that Mars in Aquarius for me definitely shows up as being involved with like teaching and being an astrology teacher. So I think there's something there too about and really my 11th house and everything. Adding into that my interest in astrology, but also, you know, I'm very into all types of ancient thought, as well as how someone like Carl Jung, for example, is drawing on a lot of ancient ideas and kind of bringing them forward into that sort of depth psychological understanding of things. Is all really big interests of mine. So I just think it all kind of goes with the south node of Neptune being there.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, and it seems to help you draw all of that knowledge together and synthesize it, and then, you know, bring it out through your Mercury.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But
Let's
I also see this just doing the Pluto paradigm analysis. You know, your Neptune retrograde in Sagittarius, you know, you're bringing information, knowledge from, I would say, dimensions. And that's the key word that's coming to me, dimensions regarding truth. You know, you talk about Carl Jung, who went into deep psychology and you know how the mind works, why certain people go through certain experiences, just getting to the core or underneath, you know, element of that and bringing that information forward, which you've done before. And it's just you're revisiting that, you know, you're bringing it back to resolve whatever dynamics your soul needs to resolve in this incarnation. But linking it to, like you said, teaching others. You know, ninth house is the teacher archetype. You know, it is the sage that, you know, has the knowledge, and Aquarius being the higher mind, Uranus ruled. So that information was going to always be a key part of your journey in this incarnation. And earlier, I was actually going to mention one of the reasons why I feel you haven't experienced the so-called bad side of Pisces or transit is because I feel you're more conscious. So you're moving through it consciously. So the way that energy is experienced is going to be very different to an unconscious individual experience, and that where, you know, a sense of disillusionment can come in and, you know, what's the point? While you're being the objective observer, you can respond with a conscious mind. Hence, you know, I feel like you're moving forward very intentionally, and it's great to see even with the transits in your charts.
Yeah, thank you. Well, interesting point. Some of what you're saying. If you bring in the nodes of Mercury, another interesting thing related to the Pluto, everything is just that my Mercury is near its own south node, but then the north node of Mercury is actually opposite Pluto. It's just kind of interesting to look at again, because I don't honestly always end up using evolutionary astrology as much anymore as I used to, and so
Yeah.
it's interesting to look at my chart again from that perspective. Yeah, so I'm just definitely noticing that as you're talking about it. Yeah, it's definitely an important thing about me. it took me a little bit longer this time, but like speaking more and, sharing when my voice and that sort of thing is definitely important as part of all of it.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So how about a light question? What do you do in your spare time?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I mean, I used to spend so much of there'd always be a significant amount of my spare time I'd be setting aside to do astrology, and now I'm doing it full time. And I've actually found that it ends up just taking up way more time than I was prepared for. In some ways, I almost feel like I have less spare time than even before, because now there's like, well, now I could really get into doing these different things, and it just takes up even more time. But so I'm still actually working on finding a better balance with that. But definitely, I really like being able to. Where I live in Olympia, Washington, so this is just a really beautiful area, and there's lots of places to go to hike or just walk around and enjoy. We're near like water, and we're not too far from an ocean, and there's mountains, there's rainforest. So anything like that is always really enjoyable for me to do. Otherwise, just getting time to read and cook and just basic things everybody does, I think. I really had an experience, my transition into doing astrology full time. I've really just noticed how like, wow, it's just like really kind of ends up taking over my life, honestly. So I'm just still, I feel like finding more of a balance with that.
Well, yeah, now it's a job.
Yeah, now it's a
Where-
full time job, and
Whereas before your
yeah,
job was your main focus, and now this is your job. So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, you mentioned that you like to read now. So the one question I do like to ask, because I am such a big book lover, I love reading. Apart from astrology related books, is there anything you'd recommend, or a book that's helped you in your life, or you just read it and just gone, wow, this book's amazing? Anything that the audience that you would recommend that they could read?
Yeah, I saw that you had that question, and so the one that I'll share is All About Love by Bell Hooks,
Bell Hooks.
which I've gotten even more into recently, because I kind of opened up another level of that book for me, when I was so the book that came out maybe like 2000, maybe come out at the very end of 1999, but very much like a 1999 into 2000 new millennium kind of book. When at this last NORWAC astrology conference, I gave a talk on Saturn and Neptune, because as you mentioned, with that transit I have with Neptune, it's so big in my chart. Plus Saturn is obviously transiting my chart at the same time, and we have this massive Saturn Neptune conjunction that's going on, that's going to happen, right at 0 Aries, where if you notice my chart, that's exactly where my Jupiter and Sun are. And I find the Saturn Neptune cycle to be one of the most fascinating ones. I think it's really one of the most important cycles. And I know it does get a lot of attention. I actually, though, honestly feel the Saturn Neptune cycle has not gotten the total attention it deserves, as almost being, to me, the most important cycle, just in terms of like reality and our experience of reality. And so I just got really into researching as much as I could the Saturn Neptune cycle. And then, because I've been doing a lot of research and work around that, I spoke about it. And then putting together the talk, I was trying to figure out who's like famous people that I could focus on. And I had noticed Bell Hooks is born with Saturn Neptune together. She actually has the balsamic Saturn Neptune. She's born in I want to say 53 or 52, maybe. I think she's
52.
52.
52, yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna say she must be 52, because I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering right, she's born because in 52, 53, there was repeated Saturn, I think 3 Saturn Neptune conjunctions. And I'm pretty sure in 52, she's born right before the first one. So she has Saturn maybe like 4 degrees or so, 3 to 4 degrees behind Neptune and Libra. And so I'd already been kind of thinking bell hooks would be really good to use. And so I started looking at her life and just how it plays out with Saturn, Neptune. And it was just really mind blowing to me. And then I was reading all about love, and that book also just, I mean, it's just a really beautiful book. You don't need to be into astrology whatsoever to get into it, but once I started thinking about it connected to Saturn, Neptune, and then everything going on in the world. Sorry, I know you asked about not making this about astrology, but it made me feel like, wow, bell hooks is actually, because it's going to be such a massive change and disorienting time in the world that we're all going to be going through, and we can obviously already tell what's happening, right? But the crazy thing, of course, is that it's only barely beginning right now, and it's going to get so much more intense, the Saturn Neptune aspect of everything. So I really feel bell hooks is this great sort of prophet messenger of Saturn Neptune, and a way to really navigate through the times ahead. And I especially really love this book all about love, which again, I'm making it sound astrological, but it's
That's okay,
you
because
don't need to have
Yeah.
any. It actually has nothing to do with astrology, unless if you are reading it and if you're thinking about her being a Saturn Neptune person, I think you'll find it pretty obvious the way I was seeing the different connections with it. So for example, one thing she talks about in that book is she's talking about, so what's also interesting is this was back in 2000 or 1999, you know, she's writing this in the end of the 90s, and she's talking about how, you know, our culture has just lost love, and we have no sense of love and what love is, and everything's just this polarity, I mean, the way she talks about it, you know, everything has gotten so much worse since the time that she wrote that book. But because it was so like on point with what was happening, even though she wrote it, you know, over 25 years ago, it's very resonant and relatable to what's going on now, because you can just see how everything's just gotten even more worse. And she was really kind of warning us about things that were already going on back then that, you know, have just gotten even more pronounced and intensified since. And so, for example, one thing she quotes this author, M. Scott Peck, who wrote this book, A Road Less Traveled, in the 70s, actually at another Saturn Neptune time period. And she uses a definition for love, which is love is the will to extend one's self for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. And so she kind of takes that idea of a definition and also talks about then how to start applying that. And so, for example, in our culture, you know, there's a big thing with like falling in love, and how, you know, by describing it in that way, we're talking about it very much like we have no responsibility, like we're just kind of blind. And so a lot of it's partially about, you know, by defining it and being clear about what we're talking about, that makes it helpful to be actually responsible and accountable, to not just imagine it, but to actually bring it into being in our life. And some of that goes into, you know, how to deepen into, if you're in a romantic love relationship, to use that as a way to be open to, you know, how you and your partner is changing. But she also then takes that to be, you know, how we can have love in all these different forms and all these other types of relationships. I mean, it doesn't have to be coming through, you know, this like primary romantic relationship. She also talks a lot about, I mean, there's so many things she talks about that are in the book that are great. But one that's also applicable to what's going on is how our culture, and which she'll often really frame as being like, you know, white patriarchal, capitalist. I think I'm forgetting another term that's in there, but she'll kind of dissect the different cultural conditioning paradigms, and is very good at dissecting that and showing how it's playing out with influencing things, and then how there's this sense of lying, that and lying is encouraged, and having this like false self just to fit into the system and succeed, whether that's capitalism or whatever else is kind of cultural perspective that you're in. I guess this would be very, I'm thinking now that I'm talking to you too, like the Capricorn evolutionary astrology perspective is definitely in there with it. But and how we need to just the importance of getting space to kind of like take solitude and when necessary, and remove yourself to kind of connect in with who you really are, and finding ways to bring that into the world, and that we're going to be going through really difficult times. And so instead of looking at that with fear, because something else she talks a lot about is that fear really just supports these oppressive power system structures that are all about running on alienation and division. And so instead looking at like, this idea of like true love really thriving actually in difficult times, and that if we're, going through difficulties and difficult time periods, like we're all going to be going through, it's also a time of great change. It can be a time of self-actualization, actually, and becoming more of who you're meant to be, and supporting that in yourself and other people you're in relationship with. And trying to think if I know wrote down a few notes ahead of time. Also along this idea of division and the polarization that's going on now, and how everyone's will often be kind of at war with one another, just about what side of different opinions people are on, and no one can even agree with what the truth or reality even is. And there's layers upon layers of different theories and things, that are just being layered on top of one another. But there's a lot of, I think her work in that book also puts a lot of emphasis on just the importance of dialogue and communication and listening, and not looking at safety just being everybody has to be the same and everybody has to agree with you, because there's been a lot of focus on that people having the same opinion, and then really using that to create division. Because if you're just looking at being safe is everyone agrees with you, everything's the same, then you're going to start having fear about differences. And we need to I think the book is just really amazing. I feel like it would be, if you just read it, you'll just find it an inspirational book. I'm sure anybody would. But I've also just thought, and in fact, this book has come back into cultural popularity in recent years anyway. It's like, even though it's an older book, it's like returned to best-selling lists for good reason. And I also think it's a key book, and I think her work in general is just a really good body of work for the years ahead that we're going to be going through.
Well, I work part-time in a bookshop, and I'm telling you now, that's come back. That's on the top, the bestseller table.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it is, yeah. So when you
Yeah.
picked it up, I was like, I've been meaning to read that. You're my
Oh,
sign.
yeah.
I'll be picking that up tomorrow. I'm gonna
Yeah.
read that book.
Yeah, that's a long answer to that question, but
No, it's good.
Well, that was a great answer.
Yeah, yeah, definitely I would recommend reading it. Yeah, it's a great book. You'll be I would find it hard to believe anybody couldn't be very moved by that book, and find it very insightful about yourself, and understand yourself more, and relationships and everything else. Yeah.
Wow, this has been so much fun, Gray. I have one last question before
Okay.
we finish
Yeah.
up. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like people to know about you?
Well, I guess it just in case people want to connect with what I'm doing. I mean, one of the things I really love doing is astrology consultations. And so in late August and the first few weeks of September, I'm definitely will be gone and not available for that. But either before earlier in August, if you're watching this, or later in September, you can always book a consultation with me. I really love working with people. See, you mentioned the Patreon. You've been a great supporter of me there and coming to the meetings we have. But yeah, that's also available, where one's just kind of like a supporting level and you get some extra content. And then one level, there's a monthly meeting after each new moon around the first crescent light of each cycle where we just talk about what's going on
And
with
that's so
transits
much
or
fun. That's so much fun.
yeah,
I'll put links to how to get in touch with you in the
yeah.
description of the video. But yes, that monthly Crescent Light Salon
Mhm.
is so much fun because we talk about, I mean, you give an overview of the month ahead, but then we talk about how it affects each one of us that are there.
Yeah, and I've heard from people. I didn't totally realize when I was starting it how that one just kind of took shape a lot in that way, and I realized it was actually helpful for people because I'd say that's a way that people can learn
Yes,
astrology too, because people will often then share stories about what's going on in their life, and we can see their chart and just see how things are playing out, and so it's a good way to learn astrology that way. And then, like I
yes.
mentioned earlier, there's another one where each month we've been doing a different fixed star. And so,
And that has been, I mean, I honestly, because I didn't know that much about fixed stars, have gotten, I mean, so much information that, I mean, it's like,
yeah,
I'm trying to assimilate all of it, but I mean, it's just fascinating. It's just,
it is
and of
fascinating.
course, we do have that Sun Jupiter North Node of line
Yeah,
connection. So I just,
it is fascinating. And actually, that whole me doing that focus on the fixed stars has been something that's gone pretty well with that Neptune coming over my sun when you were
that's
asking about that
true.
earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which
That's
actually
very
makes a lot
true.
of sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, so you can my site's graycrawford.net, and you can find information there about consultations with me as well as my Patreon. I just finished teaching a secondary progression course, and I don't know at this moment for sure what will be the next one I do just on my own, but I'll probably end up offering something through just on my own on my site. I am, though, planning to teach I taught it once already this year, but I also teach at Kepler College, which is an online astrology school, and I will be teaching towards the end of October a course on zodiacal releasing, which is one of these timing techniques that's been recovered from Hellenistic astrology. So if you've ever been interested in zodiacal releasing, that's something that you can find and enroll in on the Kepler College site. And if you also go to my site and subscribe to my site, I'm sure at some point I'll be announcing that's happening also.
Exciting. Awesome. Great.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you
you.
so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great to spend time with both of you.
Yes, it has. And
Likewise.
I actually learned a little bit more about you, and I hope that our viewers did too. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
It's been great to be here with both of you.
Okie doke.